Thank you, Mr Speaker. Kia ora koutou. Mr Speaker, when this bill first appeared a week or so ago, I recalled an experience prior to the 2005 election when I spoke on behalf of the Greens at an event organised by the Resource Management Law Association. And Dr Smith was also at that event speaking for National, clearly. In the course of his presentation, Dr Smith commented that he was in favour, and he talked in positive terms about the establishment of some sort of an environmental protection agency, and appeared slightly surprised when I evinced Green support with a similar view that indeed we also believed that there was value in having a genuinely independent, well-resourced, standalone agency, one step removed from a policy process, several steps removed from ministerial control, from political advocacy, indeed an agency that could stand and speak and be the advocate for the environment, because that is what is missing in this. And it has long been our policy to support the idea of such an agency, an independent environmental reporter, advocate, an organisation that can make good decisions with the well-being of the environment in mind. Because if we do not maintain a good environment, our economic and social arrangements will collapse in their turn. So we do, clearly it would be perverse of us not to support the establishment of this authority. But we do so, as has been commented by Labor speakers, we do that with considerable reservation, because there are elements of this bill that leads us to think that we would not see the genuinely strong, independent and well-resourced agency that is required to do this job and to do it well. Part of our concern arises from the current situation where the nascent EPA, the skeletal EPA that currently exists due to the haste of this government to establish something rather than do the job properly in one hit. We are very concerned about the way that the EPA, which scarcely is off the ground, is allegedly dealing with quite a number of very substantial matters which are of considerable public concern and interest, and that have major and long-term environmental and indeed economic consequences. Clearly, the Waterview situation. I attended one of the public meetings some weeks ago where the public allegedly were to be informed and enabled to make sensible submissions on the proposal for the Waterview connection. The public was presented with a massive amount of information, much of it highly technical in nature, and they were allowed 20 working days in which to have some comment about that extremely complex series of decisions. Some 53 individual resource consents. The people of Waterview, the people of Mount Albert, the people of Point Chevalier, given 20 days as lay people to try and come up with submissions that I said at the time would challenge a very good, well-resourced and effective resource management consultancy to come up with a comprehensive submission to such an enormous project. If this is to be the way of the EPA, that it will be obliged to do things quickly, shabbily, without appropriate public involvement, that is not an EPA we could continue to support. It is true that since, particularly in matters of resource management, since 1991, there has been a need for more central direction, for more consistency within and between the various local and regional agencies. And clearly the central government has been was remiss for many years under a variety of governments in not promptly and comprehensively providing national policy standards, national environmental standards. And it's been as an inevitable outcome of that, of course, the regions in particular were obliged to invent wheels of their own accord. We got a lack of consistency, a great deal of time and effort was lost, and the implementation of the RMA in particular was suboptimal for that reason, and that was observed not only by players and commentators within New Zealand, but by international researchers, everything from independent academic researchers through to the OECD, that we desperately needed a little more central direction, not necessarily control, but certainly direction, support, resourcing for the satisfactory implementation of what was and still is in many regards quite visionary and groundbreaking legislation. One of the advantages that's posited for this new agency, this new authority, is that it will bring together a range of skills, abilities, and particularly technical and indeed scientific skill. And I believe that is a good thing. We are a small country with a relatively small pool, getting smaller by the minute as our failure to give a good career path to scientists has led to the inevitable reduction of that. But while I entirely endorse the idea of bringing together concentrating skills, knowledge, ability, resources, I do hope that this agency is not one where we have a concentration of worldview, a concentration of values, such that the culture of the organisation becomes monosyllabic. It's critical that this agency, albeit a regulatory agency, does employ and have it within its numbers people with a range of views, a range of worldviews, a range of values, so that can make good determinations that will engage with the values, the range of values and beliefs that are reflected in the broader society. We are told that the agency will give some certainty of process, and again that's a desirable thing. We ought to know people independently, that is members of the public as well as specialists and indeed politicians, ought to be able to rely on certainty of process. But let us hope that there is not an equivalent certainty of outcome. Increasingly, when we hear the language of streamlining, taking away barriers, taking away cost from resource management processes and other processes, we see what really is intended is that we want to get faster to the point where the agency says yes to any application. There is a remarkable concentration, it seems, on getting faster to the point where the agency says yes to the development, no matter what its quality. And we think that equally there should be situations where we get quickly to the point of saying no, where there is clear environmental, social or indeed economic reasons why we ought to resist and object to and reject entirely some of these very flawed applications we've seen. I would have to say that there are 4 words in this bill that give some heart and that they're quite sweet to us in the Greens, and those 4 words are IRMA will be disestablished. So IRMA, the Environmental Risk Management Authority, has often been called the authority that never saw an application it didn't like, particularly in respect to genetic modification, genetic engineering. Unfortunately, what could have been a robust, positive, useful organisation has become a rubber stamp and very little else. It has allowed, it has tolerated, it has passed some extraordinarily risky, scientifically unsound, ethically untenable applications, and we will not in any way regret the passing of that organisation. And we hope quite sincerely that this new organisation, this new authority, will have a much more inquisitive culture, a much more challenging culture that will lead to much better and more balanced outcomes. The 2 primary principles of resource management law that the Greens stand by and will continue to defend are those of public participation and environmental protection. And of course the language of the RMA is that we ought to use, develop and protect our natural and physical resources. And there's been a great deal of use over the years, and indeed a great deal of development, some of it good, much of it less good. And it's critical that this agency, this authority, is genuinely an environmental protection authority, not a developmental facilitation authority. And given the way in which this bill is constructed and some of the past and present activities and focus of this government, it is our major concern that this agency will be misused in that way. We heard the Minister in his introduction to the bill use the word balance, and clearly we in the Greens have come to recognise that that word balance is in fact a shorthand for trading off a little more environmental degradation for a little more short-term economic gain. And that is not a notion of balance that we can comprehend or support. What is actually called for is a clear understanding of a genuine engagement between our social and economic needs, but the absolute, critical, irrevocable protection of the environment without which we have no future. The Minister also recommended stronger public institutions. We would like to see that made flesh rather than this continual chipping away.
Sorry to interrupt the honourable member.